Well, it is a real pleasure to introduce tonight's event. This is, I think, the 5th or 6th event that we've done together between the Global Studies Center and the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra. Every time I've had a real pleasure working with Beth Perdue-Outland, who is a Vice President for Community Engagement and Strategic Innovation. I love that title. That's really good. And definitely we work together on community engagement. And I think we'll just get the ball rolling. Most of you are students. I don't need to tell you about the Global Studies program. I think you guys know about it. But definitely take a look at the catalog and at the brochure and see what's coming up next. And I think there's a lot of good events that you guys will find of interest. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand it over to Beth, and she's going to introduce our panel and take it from there. And I hope you'll really enjoy this. I think it's going to be a really enjoyable and hopefully beautiful evening. Thank you. Beth.
Well, thank you, Pierre. I want to thank Marian University. Here is one of the things that I think is incredibly special about this place. In a Global Studies Speaker Series, they are mindfully including the arts. It's very easy to intersect with public health and politics and other things of that nature, but I really appreciate that this university has the forethought and the understanding that the arts really truly bring us together. They help us explore and explain the world on a global level. And so the fact that they choose to make sure that the arts are included in this series, I think speaks an incredible amount of the values of this university. And it's one of the reasons that we're always happy to partner here and work with Pierre and the rest of the team at Marian. So thank you so much for being here. Like Pierre said, I'm Beth. I'm with the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra, and I'm super excited because frankly tonight my job is to talk with people who are my friends and people I really incredibly admire. So on my far left is Glen Kwok. Glen is the Executive Director of the International Violin Competition of Indianapolis. And before that, he was the Director of Music at Mercyhurst University, is that right? And before he came here in 2000 to be the Executive Director of IVCI. Now, during his tenure here, he has also spent 6 years as the chairman of the board of the World Federation of International Music Competitions. Did I get that right? That is headquartered in Geneva, and I am anxious to learn more about what that is. He also has 2 degrees in violin performance himself. To his right is my colleague and partner in crime at the ISO, Katie McGuinness. She has 3 degrees in piano performance, both from the Royal Academy of Music in Ireland and at Indiana University. Before coming to the ISO just a few years ago, she worked at the Aspen Music Festival, at Harrison Parrott, which is an artist management agency in London, and then at the Pittsburgh Symphony before we scooped her up and brought her to Indianapolis. And immediately to my left is like someone who gives me goosebumps. Augustin Hadelich is the Gold Medal Laureate of the International Violin Competition 2006. He has an incredible career. He won a Grammy Award in 2016 for Best Instrumental Music Performance, and was in 2018 was named, okay, there's the title in here somewhere, but the Best Musician by Musical America. Like, insanely good cred. It's amazing. And one little story I have to tell about him, I don't know if you remember this, but it was several years ago, because I've been with the ISO a long time, and I don't even know how we got you to do this, but it was after you were in the competition, and you were playing on a service where we were actually auditioning associate conductors. And so we wanted to have a soloist who played with the orchestra while we were assessing which associate conductor we were going to hire. And you came in and you played, and there were a few of us in the house, and our job was to be watching the conductors and listening to them and seeing if we wanted to hire them. And we all forgot. Because we were all just watching and listening to him, and we're so blown away that at the end of it, they were like, what did you think of the conductor? And we were like, oh, we don't know. Because we literally forgot to pay attention. And so tonight, one of the things I want you to realize is we have these incredible international and global assets in the music world that are headquartered right here at Indianapolis, and they're changing the world of music. And so many people in our community don't know. So we're going to chat about that. So I'm going to start with you, Glen. Yeah. Now, tell us, you just finished, right, your 10th quadrennial competition of the International Violin Competition. and that is 17 days in September. It's known as the Olympics of the violin. And around the rest of the world, it's called the Indianapolis, right? So he's a gold medalist in the Olympics of the violin. Tell me, first of all, what is the International Violin Competition? What are those 17 days like? What happens during that period of time?
It's an incredibly, well, we should ask Augustin what it's like. From my perspective, it is an incredibly intense but exciting period for us. This, as you say, was our 10th quadrennial, so it was a huge commemorative year for us. Our first competition was in 1982, and many people often ask if this competition is so big and now one of the largest and most respected in the world, why, of all places in the United States, is it in Indianapolis? And why not New York? Or if it is in the Midwest, why not Chicago, et cetera, et cetera. And I certainly am so proud for our city to have something of this stature that puts Indianapolis in the international cultural spotlight every 4 years. And the simple reason is because we approached a famous violinist and pedagogue in the 80s, Joseph Gingold. Joseph Gingold was one of the foremost violinists. He was the concertmaster under George Zell of the Cleveland Orchestra before joining the faculty of Indiana University in Bloomington. He had served on every major jury throughout the world. To that day in the 1980s, if you can imagine, we looked to Europe for all the role models. Competitions, international competitions, had actually existed for many decades before the United States ever had one. The Chopin piano competition was founded in 1927. The Queen Elizabeth competition in Brussels, Belgium, was 1937. And so here we are, fast forward 50 years, Indianapolis, we want to do something of the same kind. Joseph Gingold, because of his reputation, was invited to serve on all those juries, including also the Sibelius competition in Finland, the Paganini competition in Italy. And so he knew the protocol, he knew how they were run, he knew all the other colleagues of his, the jury members. And so when we approached him and said, would you help us create a competition right here in Indianapolis? He, of course, thought this was the greatest thing that he could do this, not only to be asked, but to do it in his own home state of Indiana was a huge honor for him. So he immediately said yes, and that was the beginning of a wonderful tradition for us. That now, as I said, when we first started the competition, we looked to Europe for the role models, but now Indianapolis, we're proud to say, has become a role model for other competitions throughout the world. The World Federation that you had mentioned was formed in 1957 with just 13 competitions, and all those competitions were in Europe, so just one continent, and now they represent competitions on 6 continents. So you can imagine that it has just exploded throughout the world, certainly in North America, but now the latest is in Asia, where competitions of all disciplines are really exploding. And the reason the Federation was created was that they realized all competitions, regardless of discipline, whether it's instrumental, so violin, trumpet, or piano, or voice, structurally they're all the same. So they wanted to get together and to learn best practices from each other. So to this day, we get together annually to share. We realize all competitions on the very basic level, we have so much to learn from each other because everybody has a preliminary, semis, and a finals, and rules and regulations. So what are the best practices that we can share with each other, because those really aren't secrets. And then, of course, you hope that each competition will add whatever makes them unique for their own country, whatever that may be. In Indianapolis, we always say the one thing that people can't steal is our Hoosier hospitality, because all the violinists live with hosts. And the bond that is created between these host families and the violinists is incredible, lifelong, literally. Yeah. Augustin, to this day, remains very close with his host family, and they travel around the world to see him play for concerts and support him always. We've seen it time and time again where these beautiful relationships between the families happen. They go to weddings, and it's really fun. But this is the special touch of Indianapolis, for instance. not to mention all the artistic aspect. But so this 17 days which we just had, it was a big celebration. We had 40 violinists that were accepted into the competition.
So how do you get accepted? How do you even put your hat in the ring for something like that?
We do it, yes, great question. We do it now by videos. It used to be done in the old days by cassette. Fast forward.
None of you have ever seen those, probably.
Right, then you go to CD, and then now we're going to DVD because, as Katie just said, you can't trust it anymore, and you don't know who's actually submitting that tape for you. And so now we do it by video because, of course, you can't manipulate it as well. And also, we can actually see who you are. And so we have several hundred violinists who applied. Then we have a jury of 3 concert violinists led by our artistic director, Jamie Laredo. And we listen to all these videos, and then we select 40. Those 40 are invited to Indianapolis to come and to compete through 4 different rounds. So just very quickly, what the paces that we put these violinists through. I mean, if you actually make it all the way through, we say that you've prepared over 3 hours of music. So in the first round, it's a recital round of 45 minutes. You have to play solo Bach, solo Paganini, Mozart sonata, and a showpiece. And then we go from a round of 40 to 16. We call that our semifinal round. So in the round of 16, you have to play a 75-minute recital. And everything with the exception of one piece, the contemporary work, must be memorized. So that's the other thing, is that there's a lot of mental challenges to prepare for something like this, not only physical. And then the signature item of the semifinal round is that we commission a composer to write a work specifically for the competition. Wow. This year we invited a famous American composer, William Bolcom. And it so happens that Bolcom's background is very much in jazz, and he is a big promoter of improvisation.
Yes.
And so this is something that not all classical musicians are comfortable with. And so when you talk about what was new about this competition and exciting, all the 16 semifinalists had to do significant amount of improvisation. And so that was really a wonderful challenge for them. They embraced it. Yeah.
So wait a second. So how far? So they have to play all of this standard rep, all the rep they have been able to study for their whole lives, right? And then we're going to throw them a brand new piece. How far in advance would they get that piece?
2 months. So they get it 2 months in advance, and then June, July, August, 2.5 months. And so they do have time to learn it. And the composers always ask me, they say, what type of piece would you like me to write for your competition? And I always tell them, write something that's going to have a future, that's going to get played again, not just something to test the technique of these violinists, because quite frankly, people like Augustin, they can play anything that you write for them. They may not enjoy it, but they can play it, right? I'm sure Augustin has played plenty of pieces that, you the worst thing I feel is that you have a world premiere and then it sits on the shelf for the rest of its life. It's just no purpose. So we've been very proud that we have many, many works that have become, our whole idea was to add to the violin literature and hope that these pieces get played by other violinists in the future and have a life continuing on. So that's the second round, and then we go from 16 to 6, and those 6 play a Mozart concerto, and one of the new things that we added in the last competition in 2014 and continued this time was to play with a conductorless chamber ensemble. Oh. So 6 people played with the East Coast Chamber Orchestra, and then they played a Mozart or Haydn concerto, followed by a work by Fritz Kreisler. And then the same 6 had the privilege to play with the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra, and we were very excited this competition to be able to invite Leonard Slatkin, the famous American conductor and one of the most renowned conductors of all times, to be our guest conductor for that round. So it really puts the violinists through all their paces of repertoire and knowledge. As we say, we have 17 days to get to know you. But then the importance of that is because we're going to hopefully launch your career, or help to launch it. It's a very long process. So we say it's just the very beginning of trying to help you on your career.
All right, Augustin, I got questions. This is a whole lot to put yourself through.
Yeah.
Like, I have to learn all the standard repertoire, and then I have to give a recital, and then I have a longer recital, and then I have to learn a new piece, and then I got to play now with a conductorless orchestra, then I got to play with an orchestra. Why does a musician put themselves through this? Like, from your perspective, like, what makes a competition important? What makes you want to do this? And what makes it worth your while to do this? And to dedicate the time to being excellent in the competition setting?
Well, when I was doing competitions around that time, it was a time when it was very hard for me to get my name out there for the first time. I had some concerts, some opportunities, but it's very, very hard with so many good violinists in the world, and then maybe more than they've ever been, and the level of playing is so high. It's very hard to get those chances to play debut with an orchestra, and a competition can open those doors for you because there are a number of concerts that the winner gets automatically, but also because people hear your name for the first time and they look at your performances in the competitions, people follow it. 2006 was actually kind of a special year because it was the first violin competition, I think anywhere, that was live streamed, video streamed, the entire thing, every round. Before that, some other competitions had like highlight videos, but this was really, people were, a lot of, yeah, and I still meet people who said that back then, they were like watching the entire thing. They were just like streaming the whole thing every day. So it was kind of a big event in the violin world, and one that was followed by violinists also elsewhere in the world. So I did a bunch of competitions. I found it incredibly stressful to do a competition because the process of performing for people, to walk on stage and perform for an audience, that was something I was actually quite comfortable with and I enjoyed. There was this special energy, and of course I'm a little nervous, but it's great actually. But playing in a competition for a jury and be judged like that it felt different. I find it much harder actually. And your brain can't help but start sort of going to the wrong place and start worrying about what's the jury going to think about this choice I made there, and are they going to like it or not, or should I, all of this stuff. And in addition, you're kind of competing against other people, which in this case, many of them were my friends actually, that I went to school with. And as a violinist, actually the greatest thing about being a violinist is that you usually play with other people, that you're actually making music together and not against each other, right? So that was certainly took quite a toll on me. And so when I won this competition, one of the thoughts I had was that now finally I won't have to do another one. But I will say this, that the Indianapolis competition, of the competitions that I went to, was particularly welcoming. And what you said about hospitality is absolutely true. The way that the host families take care of the participants, and actually the fact that we were referred to as participants and not competitors. Like even like little choices of word, just anything to make it feel slightly less competitive, more like a violin festival or like more like a performance. We also had an audience that came basically to enjoy music, not to be the hobby judges, which happens in some competitions, that you look at the audience and you see people with pen and paper like making notes themselves. What are you doing? So,
wow.
So this was a very, very warm, appreciative audience, really, and that helped a lot as well, and the support of the host families and just many things. Even the way that, so those rounds, it sounds really grueling, 75-minute recital. But of course, when you play a recital, sometimes you go out after a piece and there's some applause in between pieces, and so it was done this way, so that it actually feels like a concert, basically. It feels like playing a 75-minute concert, and that was something I'd done before. I felt more comfortable with, and there are actually competitions out there that will not allow you to go off stage between pieces. That you stay there, you play, and then you leave, and nobody claps, and just almost anything to make you feel uncomfortable. So this was, I think that was a big strength of this competition.
So you said one of the things, the benefits of winning this one is you felt like you didn't have to do another one. Is that what happens though? You win a major competition and then you're like, great, I've got that sort of feather in my cap and I can move on with my career?
Yes and no. There are examples of people who then actually went on and did other competitions. And some people actually really like playing competitions. I have some friends who love it and don't want to stop ever. So, I don't know. I think that, you know, there are violinists out there that have big careers who never did never entered any competitions, and they launched a career in other ways. In some cases it was a record label, in other cases it was a famous conductor who really liked them and kind of took them on tour with them. Or there are many ways to start a career, and actually everyone's career is a bit different. How it starts, how it develops. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Very good.
So I felt though that in my case I kind of needed something to like some sort of push, and it did an enormous amount because I had a management at the time actually, but suddenly people were actually calling the manager back and responding and said, okay, well maybe we'll find a slot for him to get those first debuts. And sometimes people kind of make the mistake of thinking that you win a competition and so then you kind of have a career automatically. It is actually the start. Can be the start of a career or like a step in it. But then the real competition continues every time you go somewhere. I mean, you must have this. You really have to make a decision: will you hire this person back or not?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think a lot of what you were saying about the Indianapolis competition, the fact that they let you come off during the recital and they make it normal. The whole point of the competitions is, and why they're so grueling, is that they're putting them through these different phases to prepare them to come to me, to come to work and have a full-time career and to play with orchestras.
Can you give us a little context, Katie, about what your job is?
Yeah.
Like, so what is it you do, and how do these competitions inform how you do your job?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so I'm Director of Artistic Planning for the Indianapolis Symphony, and my core duties are to pick guest conductors and to pick guest artists and to program them throughout our classical subscription series. And I plan at least 2 seasons in advance for this, and I have 18 weekends that I have to program for. 8 of those are with my music director. So of course on the weeks with my music director, he kind of weighs in a lot more with which artists he would like to have with him and what programs he would like to conduct. But then for the other 10, it's me who's deciding who's the guest conductor and who's the guest artist and what are they playing. And there are a lot of different details involved in that process. But in choosing the artists and getting artists kind of on the radar with competition, you're absolutely right. Winning a competition is not enough. There are so many competitions out there. My husband is a pianist, and we were talking about this the other day. I think there might be 300 piano competitions. 300. So can you imagine how many calls I would get for the first prize winner of all of those 300 piano competitions? And unfortunately, I have to say it, that just because you win a piano competition, just because you win a competition doesn't necessarily mean that you have the ability or the goods to be a musician for a long time. And there are certain competitions, like the Indianapolis competition, that actually can spot the musicians that do have that ability. There are many competitions out there that just pick prize winners and they're kind of robotic, basically. And so after a while, that becomes boring for orchestras and they don't get booked anymore. But if I get called and I'm told, oh, it was the winner of the Indianapolis competition, that makes me switch my ears on because I know of that competition's reputation. The same way if they won Queen Elizabeth or if they won Van Cliburn, my ears will perk up. The same for conducting competitions. If they win Schulte, my ears will perk up. If they win competition X in the middle of nowhere, that doesn't mean much to me. So you're absolutely right. Getting a competition first prize is not enough. But over time it does help. If you win the first prize of a competition, of a major competition that has a great reputation, over time it does help, and it does get the artist put on the radar of artistic administrators. Yeah.
Now, Katie, when you and I were talking the other day, you shared that it is extremely difficult, even in really high-level artist careers, to have a career both in the U.S. and in Europe.
Yeah.
People tend to like sort of blossom in one place or the other, and it's hard to transition. And that's one of the things that Augustin is doing, and starting to do very well.
Yes.
So why is that? What makes it so challenging?
Yeah.
And when you book artists, like she said, she has 18 weeks, she's booking artists all the time. Are you ever influenced by where a person is from, and how do you keep an eye out and keep things balanced?
Yes. Yes, I definitely am. It is very hard. There's a couple of factors involved in that, and especially being from Europe myself, I do know perhaps a little bit more than some of my counterparts in other US orchestras about these European artists that are out there, because I go back to Europe twice a year to visit my family, and my husband's from Greece and my sister lives in Switzerland, so I'm in that circuit as well for personal reasons. But there are a number of difficulties. For me to take a European artist in on a subscription concert, so I have 18 in a season, so I take 8, shall we say, I take 18 soloists throughout the season. The list is endless of soloists trying to get in. And then you also, on the flip side of that, then we're also having to book very far in advance to get somebody like Augustin to come in because he's so popular. So it's trying to find that balance. But for European artists, there's a couple of issues involved with bringing European artists into the US. Their name may not be as recognized here in the US, which means that when I book somebody who's got a big name in Europe, that's not necessarily going to sell tickets for me here in Indianapolis. Then along with that, there are other issues involved with bringing a European artist in, because I also have to fly them in from Europe, which means that their flight expenses are much higher. And then they've got to do a visa, which it's becoming more and more difficult and more expensive. So often I'll get a manager calling me about a European artist saying, please give this person a chance. And I have a couple of people coming in from Europe next season, and even this season, that haven't quite made their careers in the US yet, but I know them and I love their playing and I want to help them. But I will book them, I'll offer them a fee, and by the time they get their taxes taken off that fee, because of being foreign artists, by the time they have to pay over $1,000 to do their visa, if they're lucky that they get it, by the time they pay for their flights, because sometimes I won't cover that in the negotiations, because we have not a very big budget to be able to deal with this. And then you bring the European artist in, and then the American audience don't know him or her. So it's hard for them to make their way in. They have to be extremely talented, and they have to have worked with major European symphony orchestras. And then you get the opposite, you know, of American artists trying to get into the European market. They're trying to get into the European market for the prestige, because classical music originated there. So an American artist would like to be able to say, I sang with the Berlin Philharmonic. It is one of the major symphony orchestras in the world, it is. And they would like to have that opportunity, but it's hard for American artists to be taken into the European scene because it's so closed up in there. It's so tight-knit. You know, they have their conservatories, and they have their teachers, and they have their competitions. You know, it's known that in Paris, for example, you can't live and have a career as an artist in Paris unless you went to the Paris Conservatoire. If you did not go to the Paris Conservatoire, don't live in Paris.
That is fascinating. Okay, Augustin, how does this play out from your perspective? So you grew up in Italy, I understand. So first of all, what brought you to the United States? And then where do you live now, and how, and why? Do you choose to live where you live so you can build a career in the way you want it, or is it to balance your life? And how does your choice of where you live affect the trajectory of sort of your professional career?
Yeah, so I grew up in Italy, and my parents are both Germans. But when I was 20 years old, I moved to New York, studied at Juilliard, and it was a bit of a fresh start for me, actually. And it was I think on a psychological level, very good for me to go to a place where nobody knew who I was, and I kind of it was a really wonderful environment for me somehow to be there. And then my career really started in the U.S. Because of Indianapolis competition, basically. And of course, initially, many of those concerts, opportunities that you get, I went to Carnegie Hall, and things like that happen in the U.S. So for a while, for some years, almost everything I did was in this country, and it was extremely difficult for me to get any engagements in Europe. Being European didn't help, actually, because there's so many European artists who are also struggling there. Basically, it was almost a handicap, because sometimes people said, "Oh, he's German, but we haven't heard of him. So what's up with that? You know, we never heard of this guy." That was the response in Germany. And as you said, the German music scene, because they consider themselves the only music scene that really matters, is its own sort of music bubble. And of course, they have many wonderful artists and orchestras, but they would never, you know, if you say, "Oh, I just performed with this American orchestra or that American orchestra," they kind of like, you know, it doesn't matter which one it is. Yeah. And you know, and I even ran into the problem, actually, when initially my manager was starting to write to people in Europe, that they said Indianapolis, they'd never heard. They didn't know there was a city called Indianapolis. I was like, "Are you kidding us? There's a lot of people there. You know, God forbid somebody doesn't know where Cologne is in Germany." This kind of prejudice and arrogance that sometimes.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. So I kind of saw a bit of that. So the thing that ultimately helped is that the same thing that kind of got my career going here. That, as I said, the thing that keeps it going is when orchestras invite you back, but also when conductors who like playing with you take you to another orchestra, and then that orchestra has you back with a different conductor, and that conductor takes you to another orchestra. So eventually, I work with some conductors who there's a certain amount in the conducting world, a certain amount of overlap of conductors who also work in Europe. So I started working a bit in Scandinavia and England, and occasionally here or there in Germany, and found the management there, and then worked with more conductors who also were there, and so gradually the conductors brought me to Europe. And the other thing that actually helped, funnily enough, was that I became an American citizen, and now my European management just markets me as an American violinist. And suddenly, it's like it's suddenly this. It's like they ask you questions.
Oh, it's. I remember the first time. Actually, the first time that I worked with you was in Pittsburgh.
Oh yeah.
And it was one of the kind of pitches from your management was he's got a green card. He's a citizen. And I was like, oh, okay, so I don't have to worry about visa.
That's interesting. So you're considering all those elements about who you hire.
They always sorry, I hope you can hear me. I'm like,
oh, sorry.
No, you're fine. But yes, you do. I mean, very often management will tell you that they'll say, oh, and bonus points, he or she has a green card. And it genuinely does make me go, oh, okay, well, yes, because I love the artist, and the fact that he or she has a green card means we don't have to go through all the paperwork.
That is fascinating. Okay, Augustin, I want to ask a follow-up question to something you said, and you can tell me you don't want to answer if you want to. You said that you will you'll work with a conductor, and they'll like you, and they'll want to take you around. Mm-hmm. So, do you think twice about associating yourself with certain conductors? Like, if a conductor has a reputation for being less delightful to work with, does that influence your interest in a particular gig? Because, like, ooh, if I get associated with that conductor, he or she is not lovely, and they might not be asked back. Does that sort of shadow people's influence of you? I never thought of it until you mentioned that.
So that can, that's, you make a good point. So if there is a conductor who really just behaves horribly, then maybe the fact that I was also there, maybe that's not great for me. But in general, I found that as I initially, I mean, I always had to make it work. Generally, when the career starts, you have no influence on even what piece you play often, you know. And sometimes you have to learn a new piece because that's the piece they wanna learn. And you have very little control over these things. And so then there's the conductor. So I'm like, okay, great, let's try it. And I found that there's always a way, actually, to create a good result with just about any conductor. You know, you need to have a personality. And playing a lot of chamber music actually had helped with other musicians, had helped me with this. You need to have a personality that you are able to compromise and meet conductors halfway. And there are many conductors who sometimes I think cross the line a little bit with what they with the kind of requests that they make also, you know, in terms of when they say, you know, I don't like your tempo here, why don't you do this, why don't you do that, and they kind of like, especially when you're younger and you're starting out, that there's a certain amount of patronizing, you know, comments you get, and I found that, actually I learned a lot from that I learned a lot from these conductors by being very patient and always behaving myself, and even when I was angry, like not saying anything, and then you know, it's hard. It gets easier once you're with 30 people, so to say a bit more, I find.
But I think that's actually, to give to Glen, I think that's, and I'll let you talk about it, but I think that's, you know, exactly what he said there about how to behave with the conductors. That's so important when an artist comes in for a week with an orchestra, because sometimes it doesn't work, and that creates a lot of difficulty for the musicians on stage and for the management if the artist and the conductor can't get along. And finding an artist who knows how to deal with that, I think that's something you do as well in the competition, is mentoring.
Right, and so that's one of the key aspects which differentiates the Indianapolis from other competitions, is that we really believe that one of the most important things that we can do for you is the post-competition follow-up, the career mentorship, the career launching. We feel that it's not good enough to just award you a gold medal, give you lots of cash and say, congratulations, have a nice life, Augustin, good luck. I often say to people, their success is our success. So if we look down our list of laureates to date today, you know, they're all playing around the world, and we're proud of that, because their success reflects well on Indianapolis, because they put it in their biography that they won Indianapolis. And I will say that it's so true. I've talked to so many conductors who have said, you know, we have so many choices of artists that we can work with. So, and they're at the very highest level. So if we don't enjoy working with you, there's no reason to re-invite this artist back. And so often it's about the re-engagement. I tell our laureates that I can get you the first engagement, but you're going to have to get the second engagement. In other words, if you don't have a good rapport, or you don't play well, no matter what I say to Katie, no matter how close we are as friends, she will never re-engage somebody that I sent to her, and that's the really truth about it. Yeah. And Augustin's manager once told me early in his career, and Augustin was the most junior person on her roster at the time, said to me, Glen, I have to tell you, he is the #1 re-engaged artist on my entire roster.
Wow.
And Michal told me that. He said, of all the people, wherever he plays, he gets re-engaged. And of course, all managers love that, because it makes their life so much easier. Yeah. But that was a real testament to you, that not only did you play well, but everybody enjoyed you and wanted you back.
Well, I suspect that's not a coincidence too, Glen. Could you tell people about what the prize is? Because like you said, it's not just a gold medal. It really is extensive. In fact, the day after the competition, and when everybody finally leaves out and all that, you get to sleep for a couple of days, then your work life changes, doesn't it?
That's
your
right.
Focus is very different. So can you talk about the prize and then your role over the next period of time with the artists who are your laureates?
Right, so I hate to say it when people ask me, so do you get to go on vacation for 4 years? now, unfortunately I can't. But that's actually where the next stage, it's quite exciting, exactly the day after, to work with the gold medalist. They are awarded a 24-karat gold medal. They're given $30,000 in cash. They are given a Carnegie Hall debut. And these are the things that we've been doing ever since the beginning in 1982. But some of the things that we've added, even since Augustin's time, because we believe so much in doing everything we can to help the artists, we now, for instance, we design and maintain a website for the artist, for the gold medalist. This is a very costly thing to do. And also, one of the things that I found about the artist is not everybody has time. I don't know how Augustin does it so well, but to maintain it, to keep it always up to date. And so this is something that we do for the artists. I feel that there are so many things that we can do. We don't need to teach them how to play the violin. They're all incredible. It's all the non-musical aspects, doing all the flight arrangements, all the itineraries, all the arrangements, not just getting them the concert, but talking about repertoire. You spoke about which piece. Augustin said sometimes you don't always get to play what you want to play. I remember very well with my 2002 gold medalist, Barnabas Kellerman from Budapest. So one time saying to a big orchestra, they said, what pieces does he have in his repertoire? And I listed 8 concertos from Haydn to Ligeti. I mean, this is a really big spread. Not everybody carries 8 concerti right out of a competition. And they said, oh, that's fine, but can he play Lalo? So they picked a 9th piece. And I said, really? You couldn't pick one of the 8 I just listed for you? And luckily, he had played it. But that's sort of my role, is to also make sure that just because you're young and eager, that you don't say yes to everything. Because one thing that happens too is that young people say, yes, I can do this, yes, I can do that. I want to play in Paris, I want to play in Seoul, and I want to play here. And then when it comes to that day, they say to me, well, it sounded like a great idea to play Brahms concerto in Seoul, but I didn't realize next week I'm going to be in Germany and I have to play Mozart concerto, and then, to juggle this amount of repertoire. I often say that if you were to even just shadow Augustin or any artist who travels as much as they do, just carry his bags, you would be exhausted because of the time zone changes and everything, right? Now imagine doing that, getting off a plane and walking straight into rehearsal, which is what they often have to do, and it's exhausting. I mean, and then you have to walk out on stage. And I always admire the artist that still gives 200%, whether you're exhausted, you're sick. I'm sure there are times that you maybe weren't up to physically wanting to play, but you had to play, right? Yeah. And we are in the entertainment business, whether you like it or not. People pay very big money sometimes to hear these artists, and they will be very disappointed if you just, what we call in the music business, phone it in. It's really very disappointing for the audience members. But so yes, we really work on this aspect. We work on, for instance, helping them with their financial planning. Something else we added even how to dress and how to do educational outreach and things, because we realized, again, musically there's no problem there, but all these other things take into account suddenly all the money that you're earning and what you do with that money, and hope you're not spending it all, and all these things. So that's what all goes into the package.
That is fascinating. I'm glad you brought up the repertoire question too, because this weekend, Augustin is playing the piece that he won the 2006 competition with. It's the Bartók Violin Concerto No. 2. So you have the chance to hear him do that live, and it's exciting. You won't want to miss it.
Yeah.
Now, I have to tell you, I want to know, are you excited to play that piece you won the competition with every time? Or is it like Taylor Swift being asked to sing Shake It Off? Like, oh my gosh, now again. You're like, oh my, the Bartók, I really want to play such and such. Or are you excited to play that? Or is it just a signature of yours? I mean, what relationship do you have with that piece that was your winning piece now, 12 years later?
Well, this was actually always one of my favorite pieces, and I had this passion for Bartók and his music and his style, and which was partially why I picked it as the repertoire in the competition. So when you pick your repertoire, you can, for each category, choose from a pretty long list of different pieces that would fit into that category. So it was the categories like romantic or modern concerto, right? major concerto, and there's a ton of them. There's like 20 or something.
Exactly.
And I felt, well, this is something that it's music that I really love, that I'm really passionate about, and that it really suits me, and I started playing it. So that was the reason back then. I actually, because Bartok's music doesn't get programmed so much, it's not a piece that I've been playing non-stop. It's I've played it a lot since then, and I play it very differently now, I think. Many little details have changed, and but I still love it, and I actually haven't played it so much that I'd be tired of it or anything like that. And it's in a way very special to now stand on the same stage again. Some of the same people in the orchestra also, and maybe a little bit relive that experience. But a lot has happened in these 12 years, and what Glenn was saying, these kinds of all these things that you don't know when you start out. You think all it's going to be is this glamorous life of playing concerts all over the place, but you don't realize how all the little annoying things you have to figure out along the way. And you don't, you learn a lot about yourself and what you need to do, how you need to travel, when you'll be tired, how to deal with jet lag, and to juggle a lot of different repertoire. That's also an experience thing, that eventually I just know how much time I will need to work on each piece in order to be ready. And some of that comes from experience, and some of that also came from the great advice that I got from Glenn, who was always there with lots of very helpful advice that somebody who's just out of school, a student, doesn't know the first thing about. And I never quite realized how much time is really wasted and spent on silly stuff that has nothing to do with music, that has to do with making programs, or booking travel, or just sitting in a plane doing nothing to get to one place to another. And I learned also very early on, and this was also something that you said, that particularly because some of the first concerts I did for the competition after winning were in very small halls, small towns in the middle of nowhere in Indiana. So that I learned there are no small concerts actually, but every concert has to be a very important, exciting event for you whenever you walk out on stage, even if you don't know anyone in the audience, even if you're at the other end of the world, or even if you're tired, that you kind of have to try to give everything every time, and not think just because it's not Carnegie Hall, I'm not going to bother today, I'm practicing today. Because actually, well, first of all, the people in the audience, they bought a ticket, and this is the only time they hear you. But also sometimes you don't know who's sitting out there in the audience. Sometimes it could be, I played a concert once, really in the middle of nowhere, and it turns out that a really major violinist was sitting in the audience the whole time, and afterwards, you never quite know who shows up. It's another reason, but just in terms of principle, that you should always give everything, and not even in the performance, but sometimes even in a rehearsal. So when you start rehearsing with an orchestra, you give the first impression with the first notes you start playing, and it's easy to think, well, I have 2 more rehearsals, I can practice in between those rehearsals. But you should actually be sounding good enough right away, so that, because it has happened to me sometimes that actually the orchestra management only stopped them by the first rehearsal, and they actually went on there the rest of the time. Okay? So that's the only time they ever heard me play. So that just any time you're working in front of people, that you always try to play as well as you can. And that sort of work ethos or something, I think helps you kind of sustain that.
Yeah. Well, we are very fortunate. I believe that you can only talk about music for so much, and then you just have to hear some. And so Augustin has kindly agreed to play a short piece for us this evening. And so we are going to let him go for a few minutes so that he can warm up his fingers. And so he's going to be back, and so I have some questions for Katie and Glenn. Just whenever you're ready, come on back in. While he is out warming up. So, yes, sir.
Glenn, is the competition behind the screen, or do you see these, August mentioned personality, I wonder if that's taken into effect?
You see everything, and that's an excellent question, because in some competitions they actually do the screening behind the screen, even though it's done on video. So they make you turn it in by video so that the administrators know that it's legit, but sometimes they put the screeners behind.
So the judges
judges can't see it.
Okay,
in Indianapolis, our philosophy is that we have so little time to get to know you. We want to know everything about you, so we really want to see you. We want to see how you perform, and we, like I said, we're in a very visual business. So whether you like it or not, it's if you are very charismatic. I mean, certainly that's not. I mean, we don't pick people. They don't win if they're only charismatic, but all these things play in the end. And how you collaborate. One of the reasons we did this classical round with a conductorless orchestra was because we wanted to know, do you collaborate with these other people on the stage, or do you just stand in front and make everyone follow you? Do you have eye contact? Do you really work together? It's fascinating what you can learn from people. They don't know what we're looking at. I mean, they probably assume this is what we're looking for, but it really shows a lot.
I have a question, Glenn. I've heard people talk about kind of what you have to be prepared to do to support the artists who are here for the competition over those 17 days. And it's not just about like driving them back and forth to the concert hall and making sure that they get to their rehearsal and whatever. There are lots of ways you have to be prepared to meet their needs. Things like physical therapy and instrument repair. Things like that. So what kind of services do you have to line up to make sure that you can meet the artist's needs when they're in town?
Great question. And one of the things about the competition that we're so grateful for is that we have a literal whole contingency of volunteers. We have a staff of 4, full-time staff, and so we couldn't do it without about 300 volunteers. In fact, the chair of our host family committee so happens to be here, Christian Wolf, and so Christian can tell you countless stories of what you're talking about, that the host families are told on the very first, we have a big meeting before all the violinists come, and I get them together and I tell the host families, I said, first thing to know, you do not need to entertain these violinists, you do not need to take them sightseeing and do all that. If they get knocked out after the first round or second round, please do it. Add to the economy, everything. I'm sure half of them would like to be in the bar, but the truth is, they're here on a mission, on a purpose. They're here, they will practice 8 to 10 hours a day, and let them do what they are here to do. Support them in whatever they ask for. I know that over so many years, the stories actually are very funny. Some people are saying, can you imagine the violinist shows up and he doesn't have any hair on his bow? Yes, well, we have a luthier that's on call 24/7 to take care of these things. They show up and their tuxedo looks like a ball, it's all wrinkled, so they have to take it to the dry cleaner. A dress needs, having. So yes, I mean, we support them in all those aspects. And backstage, for instance, we have volunteers who have hand warmers and things. To every aspect, we try to think about making them be comfortable. And to take their mind off of the fact that this is a competition, because yes, there's a lot of stress there, and everybody wants to win. I mean, there's a lot of pressure. They've been preparing for this for many, many years. When it's once every 4 years, the musicians, they plan in their life. They said, okay, I'm 21, and so I have 2 more opportunities, because you're capped off at age 30. You cannot have turned 30 years of age. So many of them, they have a clock in their head. They know, I have 1 shot, 2 shots, or 3 shots.
It's like the Olympics.
It's literally like the Olympics. And then, just like the Olympics, just because you go to the Olympics one time, do you have it in you to go practice for 4 more years and do it again? That takes a lot. Some people have it, and some people don't. And so we have had repeat people. And we have had people who have come back. Richard Lin, this year's gold medalist from Taiwan, was here 4 years ago. Did not make it out of the first round. And this time he came back and he won the whole thing. It's fabulous. And that type of story happens a lot.
Okay, so I have a list that you had sent me, Glenn, of people in concertmaster positions all over the world that or a result of this competition. You have had 60 laureates from more than 20 countries, and never a winner from the U.S.
That's right. We're still waiting to have our first U.S. Gold medalist. And actually, this speaks volumes to, as Katie said, classical music came from Europe. The tradition is there. Our first gold medalist, we presented her last night. She's from Romania, 1982. She was our first gold medalist. 1986, Japan. 1990, Russia. 1994, Canada. We came close. And then 1998 was Iceland. So 2002, Budapest, Hungary. So yes, I mean, it is amazing. And as I was saying, and now Asia, there's been a huge focus on Asia.
Yeah.
There's so much talent coming out of Asia that is not surprising. So many of the participants are from Asia, and therefore, by virtue of that, in 2010, 2014, South Korean winners, and this year Taiwan. Yes, so we're still waiting. We're still waiting and hopeful that we will have our first U.S. Gold medalist. We have, and many people also remark or assume that because we're in Indianapolis, we must have a lot of Indiana participants, but that's not the case. We have had a few, actually, even Bloomington and Indianapolis natives who made it in, who were extraordinarily talented, but they didn't win.
Yeah, well, and IU, I don't know that everyone understands, like the IU School of Music, the Jacobs School of Music, and the sort of place it has in the international world of training great musicians. Both Glen and Katie are products of the IU School of Music. Katie, I have a question for you. You could be doing what you're doing anywhere in the world. Why do you choose to do it in the U.S.?
Yeah.
What's different?
It's a very good question. As you say, I went to IU and I left my home country, Ireland. I had been offered a position to go and study in London, but instead I decided to go to IU to do my master's in piano performance there. And I met my husband there, who is also a pianist from Greece. And we loved our time at IU, and we loved being in the US because there is really genuinely a feeling of open-mindedness and being innovative, creative, forward-thinking, and that was a really nice place to be, actually. And as Augustin said earlier, the interesting thing is, for myself, and I know my husband felt this too, is when we came to IU first, it was almost like starting again. It was, you got a blank canvas, and so nobody knew you, and you could build your career and start from there. So after IU, I moved back to Ireland to do my doctorate in piano performance, and then I lived in London for almost 2 years, but I had always wanted to come back to that atmosphere, to that mindset of, yes, you can do it. I mean, I am with Beth on the senior management team of the ISO, and it is such an open space. We meet regularly, and you can come in with the craziest idea and it'll be welcomed, and we'll talk through it. That is not always the way in Europe, I'm afraid. And as much as I love Europe and I do miss it constantly, I do like being in an environment that is willing to try new things and is willing to take this beautiful art form and respects it and wants to maintain it, but also wants to be innovative with it and creative and find new ways to bring it to audience. Whereas in Europe, it's like, this is it, take it. And yeah, I love being here, and I love being around people in the US.
Do you perform anymore?
No, yeah, it's...
We haven't talked her into it yet.
When I made the decision to move into management, I was almost finished my doctorate in piano performance. So I had done my 7 recitals and I had done my coursework, but I was all but my thesis. And I have been a pianist since the age of 3, and I've done festivals all throughout Europe and the States, and spent hours and hours practicing, and studied with a great Irish pianist who's actually with my husband playing a concert right now in Pittsburgh, and he is on the jury of numerous competitions all around the world, John O'Connor, and I had studied with him. I started playing piano at the age of 3. I started studying with him when I was 12. It was my whole life. And I got a Fulbright to go and study at IU in the States. I mean, that's what I was going to be, was a pianist. So when I made the decision very gradually to switch into management, it was a personal decision actually, that my family, my mother especially, couldn't come to terms with at the start, because she just couldn't understand, why would you have given your whole life to being a pianist and then decide not to do it anymore? So when I told her, it's not like I'm all of a sudden going to become an engineer. I'm still in the music world, and this way I can actually, you know, make an impact. I can be yet another pianist. I probably wasn't going to play on Carnegie Hall, but I could have had a nice career as a chamber musician, taught at a conservatory, but I was going to be yet another pianist. Whereas with having that strong performance background, I could actually make an impact and go into management and help musicians in that world and help people in management understand the vulnerabilities of being an artist, because I experienced it myself. So a long-winded answer, but when I made that decision, I had to make it and chop that third arm off. So it's very hard for me to go back to it now. Yeah.
But this is what can happen in a city where you have a major professional orchestra and a major international instrumental competition. And that is one of the reasons we are so lucky in Indianapolis. But the impact is way beyond our city. I mean, this catalyzes careers and musicians to be able to make a living across the world, and allows us to bring in the great musicians like this one to be here for our community. It's just the coolest thing ever. I'm really excited to be part of it. Can you tell us a little bit about your violin?
Yeah, so actually right after the competition, I got a violin on loan. This is one of the prizes you get at the competition, is that you can play on a Stradivarius violin. So Antonio Stradivari was a violin maker in the late 1600s and early 1700s in northern Italy, and his violins have been very, very famous and prized by soloists. So it's kind of a legendary name, and it's a very beautiful violin that I played on for 4 years until the next competition happened. So in 2010, I was kind of in trouble, because you get very attached to the violin that you play on. And the sound, because they all have a somewhat different sound, and it becomes your sound also, or your sound, your whole way of playing adapts to the instrument. And so it's very difficult actually to switch instruments. And it was also very difficult to find another instrument that of this kind of caliber and quality. And so I remember many conversations I had with Glen, talking about, what should I do? And so I was lucky that around the time that I had to give that back, I managed to get this one on loan. So I've had it for over 8 years now, actually, on loan. The reason why these instruments are loaned out is because it's become very, very difficult to buy them because of their age and their value, and it's not really something that, maybe 100 years ago, somebody, performing violinist, could just go to a violin dealer and buy them, but now it's, no. It doesn't work that way. So luckily the owners of this violin heard me in a concert and were willing to loan it to me. So it's also by Antonio Stradivari, and it was made in 1723, so it's almost 300 years old. Wow. And it's a very, very beautiful instrument. That so the reason why violins by this maker, by the way, why they became so sought after by soloists, this kind of happened actually much later. So 150 years after, or over 100 years after Stradivari died, soloists really gravitated towards this instrument, because suddenly people began playing in bigger and bigger spaces, in big halls. So at the time this was built, this was meant to be played in pretty small spaces, not bigger than this. But as in the 19th century, people started playing in bigger and bigger halls, music was no longer just for the nobility, the kings and counts, and to listen to, but now it was for kind of everybody. All sorts of people were going to concerts. So people needed violins that could kind of, a sound where the sound could carry to the back of the hall and still be heard in the back of the hall, and heard against larger and larger orchestras as well. And because instruments by Stradivari, especially in his later period, have quite a bright sound, which means that the overtones are very strong in the composition of the sound. the sound carries very well to the back of the hall. But we would say it projects well into the back, so you can still hear the sound very clearly from the last seat. Even if up close, it doesn't necessarily sound so much louder than another violin, just the fact that the sound is so bright. And certainly a piece like the one I'm playing this week, Bartók's Second Concerto, uses a huge orchestration, so it's every instrument of the orchestra that you can think of almost, and, that's there, and brass instruments and percussion and a huge string section. You'll see, are we using 14 first lines?
Yeah,
16?
14.
Yeah. So it's 14, 14, 12, 10, so 8 basses. So it's
Enormous.
It's enormous. So it's an enormous amount of sound also. And sometimes I play at the same time as the French horns or as other brass instruments. And so, of course, the violin is a lot softer than the French horn or the brass instrument. So instruments like these then kind of make it possible, in addition to, you always need a conductor who's also sensitive to the issue of instrumentation in an orchestra that can play very gently and sensitively, but it's very helpful then to have a violin that can kind of cut through the hall and cut through the orchestral sounds. And interestingly, sometimes up close, the orchestral violins might sound much louder than my violin, and then in the last row you hear mostly this, and no longer the others, because their sound doesn't really make it that far. So that can happen.
Thank you. Wow. I am aware that we have run out of time, and so I just want to, is there anybody here who has a last question? Yes, sir.
Yeah, you were talking about how you don't play professionally anymore.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, do you still like play just for yourself?
Yeah. Yes and no. Yes and no. Sometimes I do, but a lot of the reason that I don't play much anymore is I had trained to be a very good musician, and I'm now 6 years out of it, so you can imagine what kind of shape I'm in. And so when I sit at the piano, it's a little soul destroying to know that at one point I could actually play and now I can't. And also, yeah, it's like I'll come at the end of a day and I'm very, sometimes in the halls that I work at, when everyone's gone home, I will sometimes go to the piano, but on my own and very quietly. Or sometimes my husband might catch me at times doing it, and he'll always say, please play, or we'll do duets together, but I sound awful, and I can hear it, so, yeah.
And this is once you listen to yourself so critically, which is something that you learn when you're a student, you become more and more self-aware and more critical of little details as you try to become better and better, and then it's that's, I think somebody said, maybe it was Paganini, or there's some saying that's attributed to him, that he said, if I don't play for 1 day, then I know it. If I don't play for 2 days, then the violin knows it. If I don't play for 3 days, then the audience does know the same. So that's,
that's a nice story.
Question. So being that you each play different instruments, how can you hear? Can you be critical of other instruments, or is that for those of us who don't have musical ears? I don't know how that works, but can you talk a little bit about that experience?
So can a pianist be critical of a violinist?
Yeah, or can at least notice the nuances that a violinist would know.
Yeah, you have to be.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And yes, you can, but that actually takes a lot of training. I mean, growing up as a musician, while I was a pianist, I also played cello as a hobby, so that I experienced being in an orchestra. I also played saxophone as a hobby, so I experienced what it was like to play a wind instrument really as a hobby. But I was surrounded by other musicians, so even though I myself was a pianist, I was still hearing other instruments the whole time. And I think, when you're looking at an artist, you're looking at a musician. Of course, you're also trying to be aware of the technical abilities, but I couldn't even dream of going into the technical abilities of playing the violin. I wouldn't be able to spot those, but I can spot when an artist is a genuine good artist, I can hear phrasing. Phrasing is the same on violin, French horn, and piano. The approach to the score and the respect of the composer and his markings is the same on violin, piano, French horn. So it's the same for each instrument, you know, so you're really looking for that overall artistic approach. One thing I will tell you is incredibly difficult is conductors. That is incredibly difficult to judge, and I've been in this business for a few years now, and it's something that I still struggle with and try to learn each day, because a conductor, it's not as obvious. You can't hear necessarily, and very often their instrument is the orchestra, and so it depends. You'll have a conductor who will conduct the New York Philharmonic, and then you'll have a conductor who will conduct, you know, I don't want to insult anyone, so, you know, like an orchestra, high school orchestra, you know, obviously they're going to be very different from the New York Philharmonic, but you have to view the conductor the same way, because their instrument is slightly different because of the orchestra, but they themselves on the podium, that's really tricky to judge, and it's, some people can do it, some people can't. You've got to learn how to do it.
Thank you, Rosie. Yes, sir.
I started taking piano lessons when I was about 5 or 6. After about 8 years, I knew I was never going to be a professional musician. I'm a good hack, but I'm not. But I've been listening to classical music that long as well. So I've probably heard that Paganini 100 times or so in a lifetime. I heard details tonight that I've never heard before. Thank you.
That's why things are always. That's why you keep listening. That's why you listen over and over, and different people and different performances, so you keep hearing things. Yes, sir.
Yes, I have a question about the concert tomorrow with Bartok.
Yes.
So what came first? Augustine, and you try to ask him what he wants to play, or
Really
was it taking the Bartok?
Oh.
I assume it was probably Augustine, because the Bartok might not be the most popular.
It was Augustine first. That's a really interesting question, and it's a complicated jigsaw puzzle that we work through always. I mean, on the program, Shostakovich 4 kind of came first. So we sat down, like, before I came here, I had a meeting with my music director for about 2.5 hours of what we were going to do in 2021. So we were trying to plan, and he pinpoints various works. And so what comes first is most certainly the artist. So we sat through looking at his weeks. He wanted to do Shostakovich 4, and he wanted to work with Augustine. So then it's a matter of saying, okay, I got to check Augustine's availability. So I reached out to his manager. I gave him all of our subscription weeks. His manager got back to me, said he's available here, here, and here. And then I make sure that it's paired with my music director, because my music director most certainly said, me, I get it. Nobody else gets it, no guest conductor, me. And I said, yeah. And there are artists like that, like Augustine, that he will say, that artist only comes and works with me, because they're major artists, obviously, and that's the music director perk. So I found his availability, matched him up with the music director week, and then we said, okay, what will Augustine play? And then, of course, the competition. His manager actually was the one who really flagged that up first for me, because his manager said, well, what about Bartok 2? Because he won the competition with it. And I said, oh gosh, yeah, that would be amazing, having him do that on our stage again. And then I spoke to Christoph, and he said, oh, Bartok 2 would be perfect, because I really want to do it. I've never done it before, and it would be a great pairing with the Shostakovich. So artist first, then repertoire. And like Augustine said earlier, when you're at Augustine's level, he is allowed to pick what he wants to play. When you're coming in at that young artist level, it is really tough. We basically say, here's the week, and this is what you're playing. Take it or leave it.
But you know, but I would say there's still, so sometimes I get to sort of send a wish list of repertoire when I've been to a place a few times, and they kind of know me, and that's when it's like this. But there's still many places where I'm playing, where it's either the first time I'm playing there or not, or they don't know me as well yet, where it feels like I'm just where I was 12 years ago. So it stops. And then the other complication is that for many works, you might have done it last year or the year before. If you do 18 weeks a season, you don't want to repeat the same violin concerto 2 seasons in a row often. And So then that's often a factor that I might tell an orchestra, oh, I'd love to play this bass there because of blah, blah, blah. And they said, oh, we just did it, so we can't do it. Or we're doing it next year, or this other person's doing it. And so sometimes I send, sometimes I send 5 choices, and they're like, what else do you have? And I send another 5 choices, and they're like,
We actually just experienced that. Well, I think we're feeling maybe a little bit too much, but Glenn and I are in discussions right now about a future season with one of your competitors, and we actually experienced that recently where we went through the concerti, and he was like, okay, he could do this, no, I can't do that. He could do this, no, can't do that. You know, that was performed last season, that's already on this season, that I've got to save because we've got my music director wants it, you know. I'm not surprised with the 8th concerti, and then they say, well, does he play Lalo?
It also depends. It also sometimes depends which 8 concerti. Because if those 8 concerti are literally Mendelssohn, Beethoven, Brahms, Tchaikovsky, like all the ones that basically every violinist wants to play, right? We all love them. We will love to play them a million times. But if they include more, I learned very early on that it's good to include works like Lalo or like pieces that don't get done so much, but people might be ready to do again, and they might, oh, we haven't done that in forever, let's do that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It can sometimes be the difference between getting hired or having to wait another year.
Definitely makes sense.
Well, obviously, there's a lot to say, and it is a wild business, and there's a lot behind the scenes that when you just buy your ticket and come to a concert, you have no idea what has led up to us. And so it's been a real pleasure for us to share that with you this evening. Thank you so much.